For 3,000 years, the hegemony had ruled the galaxy with absolute authority. Their massive fleets of biomechanical warships had crushed every rebellion, absorbed every civilization, and eliminated every threat. No species had ever successfully challenged their dominion. Their technology was beyond compare, their warriors bred for perfection, and their empire stretched across 50,000 star systems. But on a cold morning in the X-Sirian system, everything changed. A single ship emerged from hyperspace, scarred, primitive, and impossibly small compared to the hegemony's mighty dreadnoughts. Yet within hours, this lone vessel would shatter an empire that had stood unchallenged since before recorded history. The humans had arrived, and they brought with them something the galaxy had never seen: the refusal to accept defeat. This is the story of how one species, deemed extinct by galactic records, returned to prove that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from perfection, but from the stubborn determination to keep fighting when all hope is lost. Admiral Zex Thera stood on the command deck of the Eternal Dominion, watching the routine patrol of the Sirian system with the practiced boredom of someone who had overseen 3 centuries of unchallenged galactic peace. The massive biomechanical dreadnought stretched nearly 40 kilometers from bow to stern, its living hull pulsing with the rhythmic heartbeat of integrated organic systems. Around them, 17 other vessels of the Third Hegemony Fleet maintained perfect formation, their synchronized movements a testament to the military precision that had kept the galaxy under heel for millennia. The Sirian system was unremarkable by hegemony standards. 7 planets orbiting a middle-aged star, 3 of which hosted conquered civilizations that provided raw materials and labor. The Kethrani mining colonies on Sirian Prime had been particularly productive lately, their crystalline nervous systems making them ideal for extracting rare minerals from dangerous environments. The Admiral's multiple eyes tracked the cargo vessels moving between planets, each one carrying enough wealth to fund a lesser civilization for decades. "Admiral," came the harmonic voice of Commander Velthas from the sensor station. The young officer's crest was raised in alertness, a sign that had caught Zex Thera's attention immediately. In 300 years of service, very little surprised the hegemony's most decorated commander. "We're detecting an anomalous hyperspace signature at the system's edge." Zex Thera's primary eyes focused on the holographic display, while her secondary eyes continued monitoring the bridge. The signature was indeed unusual, crude, unstable, and somehow familiar in a way that made her skin crawl with an emotion she had nearly forgotten: unease. The energy pattern reminded her of something from the ancient archives, something she had studied during her early years at the military academy. "Classification?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would be troubling. "Unknown, Admiral. The signature doesn't match any known hegemony technology or any of the conquered species' capabilities. It's primitive, but there's something else. The power output suggests a vessel roughly 2 kilometers in length, but the hyperspace distortion is far larger than it should be for a ship that size. The bridge fell silent except for the soft bioluminescent pulses of the ship's living systems." Zex Thera had seen the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations during her service. She had overseen the final conquest of the proud Marathian Empire, watched the last of the Silicon Lords crumble to molecular dust, and personally commanded the fleet that had sterilized the rebel stronghold at Gamma Centauri. Nothing survived contact with the hegemony for long. "All ships to alert status," she ordered, though she kept her voice calm. "Move to intercept formation." "If this is some new toy from one of the Outer Rim colonies, I want to know about it before they realize they've made a mistake." The Eternal Dominion's massive biomechanical systems responded instantly. Throughout the ship, warrior drones awakened from their hibernation cycles, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming as they checked their symbiotic weapons. The ship's living hull began to shift and flow, revealing weapon ports that had remained hidden beneath organic camouflage. Each of the 17 vessels in the fleet performed similar transformations, turning from sleek patrol ships into instruments of destruction, in a matter of minutes. The hyperspace distortion grew larger, more violent. Space itself seemed to ripple and tear around the emergence point, as if whatever was coming through was fighting its way out of hyperspace rather than emerging naturally. Zexthara had never seen anything like it. Hegemony ships slipped through hyperspace like needles through silk, their biomechanical drives perfectly synchronized with the fabric of spacetime. This looked like someone was taking a hammer to reality itself. "Energy spike detected," Commander Valvathez reported, his crest now fully extended in alarm. "Admiral, whatever's coming through is massive. I'm reading power signatures that don't make sense. It's like they're burning their own ship as fuel." And then it emerged. The vessel that tore through the hyperspace barrier was unlike anything in Zexthara's considerable experience. Where hegemony ships were smooth organic curves that flowed like living creatures, this thing was all sharp angles and brutal functionality. Its hull was scarred and pitted, bearing the marks of countless battles. Strange symbols were painted or welded onto its surface, and several sections appeared to have been repaired with whatever materials were available rather than proper engineering protocols. But it was the ship's behavior that truly caught the Admiral's attention. Instead of the cautious emergence she expected from an unknown vessel encountering the hegemony's most powerful fleet, the stranger immediately began accelerating toward them. Its engines, primitive fusion rockets by the look of them, burned with an intensity that suggested either desperation or insanity. "Scan it," Zexthara ordered. "I want to know everything about that ship and its crew." The results came back within minutes, and they made no sense at all. The ship's construction was primitive but functional, using materials and techniques that predated the hegemony by thousands of years. Its crew appeared to be entirely biological. No cybernetic enhancements, no integration with their technology. They were using manual controls to operate their vessel, relying on individual skill rather than the collective consciousness networks that made modern warfare possible. Most disturbing of all, the genetic markers were familiar. Ancient databases contained references to this species, but according to official records, they had been extinct for over 2,000 years. The last of their kind had died during the Great Cleansing, when the hegemony had eliminated dozens of species deemed too dangerous or unpredictable to be allowed to exist. "Admiral," Commander Velthez said quietly, his voice tight with an emotion that might have been fear, "the genetic scans are conclusive. These are humans." The words sent a chill through the bridge. Every officer old enough to remember the ancient histories knew what that meant. Humans had been the only species to ever successfully resist hegemony expansion for more than a few years. Their homeworld had required a full-scale invasion fleet to conquer, and even then, small groups had escaped into the void. The official records stated that the last human settlements had been located and destroyed centuries ago. Apparently, the official records were wrong. "Open a channel," Zexthara commanded. Standard protocol demanded she offer the unknown vessel a chance to surrender before opening fire. It was a formality that had been observed for thousands of years, though she could not remember a single instance where it had been accepted. The response came immediately, transmitted on an archaic frequency, using primitive electromagnetic signals. The voice that emerged from the speakers was harsh, tired, but filled with something that made Zexthara's blood run cold. "Determination. Hegemony vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran-resistant ship Indomitable. We know who you are, and we know what you've done. We've been looking for you for a very long time." The transmission continued, but what made it truly terrifying was not the words themselves, but the tone. There was no fear in the human captain's voice, no desperate plea for mercy. Instead, there was something that the hegemony had not encountered in over a millennium. A challenge. "You destroyed our worlds, scattered our people, and tried to wipe us from the galaxy," the voice continued. "But we survived, we learned, we adapted, and now we're here to return the favor." Zexthara found herself staring at the primitive human ship with new eyes. It was not fleeing, not attempting to negotiate, not even trying to retreat back into hyperspace. Instead, it continued to accelerate directly toward the center of the hegemony formation, its crude but powerful engines burning at maximum output. "Admiral," her weapons officer reported, "they're charging some kind of energy weapon. Configuration unknown, but power levels are significant." For the first time in 3 centuries of military service, Admiral Zexthara felt something she had thought permanently excised from her psyche during the enhancement process: doubt. The human ship was outnumbered 18 to 1, outgunned by several orders of magnitude, and using technology that was obsolete before the hegemony had even evolved spaceflight. By every measure, it should have been destroyed or captured within minutes of emerging from hyperspace. So why did she have the sudden, terrible feeling that this was not going to go according to plan? "All ships prepare for combat," she ordered, though she kept the uncertainty out of her voice. "Deploy standard suppression formation. Whatever these humans think they're doing, we'll show them why their species was marked for extinction." The 17 ships of the Third Hegemony Fleet began to spread into an attack pattern that had been perfected over 3,000 years of conquest. Each vessel moved to an optimal firing position, their biomechanical weapon systems charging with lethal energy. The formation was designed to ensure that no target could escape destruction, no matter how fast or maneuverable it might be. But as the human ship continued its impossible charge toward the center of their formation, Admiral Zexthara began to wonder if she was about to learn why the humans had been considered dangerous enough to require complete extinction in the first place. The species that had once fought the entire hegemony to a standstill was apparently not quite as extinct as everyone had believed, and they seemed to have brought some new tricks with them. The Indomitable's engines flared brighter, and space around the human vessel began to shimmer in a way that made the Admiral's trained eye narrow with concern. Whatever the humans were planning, it was about to begin. After 3,000 years of unchallenged supremacy, this hegemony was about to face something it had forgotten how to handle: a real fight. The first shot was fired by the humans, and everything changed. The weapon that erupted from the Indomitable was not what Admiral Zexthara expected. Instead of the coherent energy beams or exotic particle streams that characterized modern warfare, the human ship unleashed what appeared to be a stream of solid projectiles moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic rounds slammed into the forward shields of the hegemony destroyer Merciless Tide with the force of small asteroids. The destroyer's biomechanical shields held, as they were designed to do, but the impact sent ripples of energy through the defensive matrix that registered on every sensor in the fleet. What made the attack truly disturbing was not its power, but its precision. Each projectile struck the exact same point on the shields, creating a cascading resonance that threatened to collapse the entire defensive grid. "Impossible," Commander Velthaz whispered, his crest flattening against his skull in disbelief. "They're using purely kinetic weapons. The computational power required to achieve that level of accuracy at this range should be beyond any biological species." Admiral Zexthara watched the tactical display with growing unease. The human ship was not behaving according to any known military doctrine. Instead of maintaining distance and trading fire with their superior opponents, the Indomitable continued to accelerate directly toward the center of the hegemony formation. Its crude fusion engines were burning so hot that they should have melted the ship's own propulsion systems, yet somehow the vessel maintained structural integrity while pushing itself to impossible speeds. "Return fire," she ordered. "All ships, concentrate on the human vessel. I want it disabled and boarded for interrogation." The response from the Third Fleet was immediate and devastating. 17 ships opened fire simultaneously, their biomechanical weapon systems unleashing enough destructive force to shatter a small moon. Plasma bolts, exotic particle beams, and molecular disintegrators converged on the Indomitable's projected position with mathematical precision. The human ship was not there when the weapons arrived. Instead of the expected debris field, the fleet's sensors detected the Indomitable approximately 300 kilometers from its previous position, still accelerating toward them, but now following an erratic flight path that defied conventional physics. The ship was not using any recognizable propulsion system to change direction. It simply altered course without regard for momentum or inertia. "How are they doing that?" Velthus demanded, his voice rising to a pitch that indicated extreme stress. "Admiral, their ship just violated several fundamental laws of physics." Zexthara studied the sensor readings with the cold, analytical mind that had made her the hegemony's most successful admiral. The human ship's maneuvering pattern made no sense according to established science, but there were hints of something familiar in the energy signatures. Deep in the archives of her enhanced memory, she recalled references to theoretical technologies that had been deemed impossible by hegemony scientists. "Inertial manipulation," she said quietly. "They're somehow decoupling their ship from normal space-time. The theoretical papers suggested it might be possible, but the energy requirements would be astronomical." "Admiral, they're firing again!" This time, the Indomitable's weapons were different. Instead of kinetic projectiles, the human ship launched what appeared to be small, self-guided missiles. Each one was roughly the size of a personal transport, but they moved with purpose and intelligence that suggested sophisticated artificial minds. The missiles split up as they approached the hegemony fleet, with each one selecting a different target. The first missile reached the destroyer Relentless Fury and did something that made every officer on every bridge question their understanding of modern warfare. Instead of exploding against the ship's shields or attempting to penetrate them through brute force, the missile somehow phased through the defensive barrier as if it did not exist. It struck the destroyer's hull directly and detonated with enough force to tear a 100-meter hole in the biomechanical armor. Alarms began screaming throughout the fleet as similar impacts registered on 6 other vessels. The missiles had somehow bypassed every known form of defensive technology, striking their targets with pinpoint accuracy before detonating charges that seemed specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in hegemony ship construction. "Damage reports," Zexthara commanded, though part of her was already beginning to understand the terrible truth. The humans had not simply survived their supposed extinction. They had spent the intervening centuries studying their enemies and developing weapons specifically designed to counter hegemony advantages. 7 ships reporting significant hull breaches, came the reply from the fleet communications officer. "Relentless Fury has lost primary propulsion and weapons. Eternal Wrath is reporting critical damage to biomechanical systems." "Admiral, how did they penetrate our shields?" Zexthara did not answer immediately. She was too busy watching the Indomitable's next move, which was even more impossible than its previous actions. The human ship had somehow split into 3 separate vessels, each one identical to the original, but slightly smaller. The 3 ships moved in perfect coordination, as if they were extensions of a single mind. "Phase projection technology," she said, more to herself than to her bridge crew. "They're creating temporary duplicates of their vessel using quantum entanglement. The energy cost alone should have killed everyone aboard." The 3 human ships continued their impossible assault, each one targeting a different section of the hegemony formation. Their weapons had evolved again, this time launching clouds of microscopic devices that swarmed around the fleet like living organisms. The devices attached themselves to hegemony ships and began systematically dismantling their biomechanical systems at the molecular level. "Admiral, we're losing ships!" The communications officer's voice cracked with panic. "Merciless Tide is reporting complete systems failure. Eternal Conquest has lost all power. What are those things doing to us?" Zexthara watched in growing horror as nanoscale machines reduced 3,000 years of advanced technology to inert matter within minutes. The tiny devices seemed to understand hegemony biotechnology better than its own designers, finding weak points in the integrated organic systems and exploiting them with surgical precision. But what truly terrified the Admiral was the realization that the humans were not trying to destroy the fleet. Each attack was carefully calibrated to disable rather than eliminate, as if the enemy wanted to preserve the ships and their crews for some purpose. It was the tactical approach of a species that intended to study their opponents rather than simply eliminate them. "Open a channel to the human ship," she ordered. "I want to speak to their captain." The response came immediately, transmitted with the same archaic technology, but now accompanied by visual data. The face that appeared on the screen was unmistakably human, bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes, and the kind of determined expression that Zexthara recognized from ancient historical records. Captain Sarah Chen looked exactly like the humans who had once fought the hegemony to a standstill, except for her eyes. Those held a coldness that spoke of centuries spent planning for this moment. "Admiral Zexthara," the human captain said, somehow knowing exactly who she was addressing. "Your reputation precedes you. I've studied every battle you've ever fought, every tactical innovation you've developed. You're very good at conquering civilizations that have never seen your technology before." "How do you know who I am?" Zexthara demanded. "Your species was declared extinct over 2,000 years ago." Captain Chen's smile was not pleasant. "Extinct? No, Admiral. We were scattered, driven into the void between stars, forced to watch as you systematically destroyed every world we had ever called home. But we survived, and we learned, and we remembered everything you did to us." The visual display expanded to show the interior of the human ship, and what Zexthara saw there made her blood run cold. The bridge was crowded with humans, but these were not the primitive biological organisms that the scans had indicated. Each crew member showed evidence of extensive technological augmentation, but not the kind used by hegemony species. Instead of replacing biological functions with mechanical ones, the humans had somehow enhanced their natural abilities while retaining their essential humanity. "You see, Admiral, we had something you never counted on," Captain Chen continued. "We had time. 2,000 years to study your technology, to understand your weaknesses, to develop countermeasures for every weapon in your arsenal. We've been watching you, learning from your victories, preparing for the day when we could return the favor." "Impossible," Zexthara said, though her voice lacked conviction. "No species has ever successfully adapted our technology. The biomechanical integration process requires genetic modifications that are incompatible with human physiology." "You're right," Chen agreed. "We couldn't use your technology, so we developed something better. While you were perfecting the art of conquest, we were solving the fundamental problems of existence itself. Inertial manipulation, quantum duplication, molecular disassembly, technologies you dismissed as theoretical impossibilities. We made them work because we had to." The tactical display showed that all 3 human ships were now converging on the Eternal Dominion itself. Their impossible weapons had disabled most of the fleet without destroying a single vessel, and their microscopic machines had somehow learned to interface with hegemony biomechanical systems. Several of the disabled ships were already beginning to move again, but their IFF signals had changed. They were now responding to human commands. "You're stealing our ships," Zexthara realized. "Borrowing them," Chen corrected. "We need to study your latest technological developments." It's been quite some time since we captured a hegemony vessel, and you've made some interesting improvements. Don't worry, we'll return them when we're finished. Most of them, anyway." The Admiral found herself in a position she had never experienced before. Tactical disadvantage against an apparently inferior opponent. Every weapon in her arsenal had been countered. Every defensive system had been bypassed, and her enemy seemed to know her capabilities better than she knew them herself. With the first time in 3 centuries of military service, she was facing an opponent that was not just willing to fight back, but actually capable of winning. "What do you want?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Captain Chen's expression hardened. "Justice, Admiral. Your species spent 3,000 years conquering and enslaving everything you encountered. You destroyed entire civilizations, wiped out species that had done nothing but exist in your path. You turned the galaxy into your personal empire and called it peace." The human captain paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of centuries of carefully nursed hatred. "We want our galaxy back, Zexthara, all of it. And we're going to start by taking apart your empire one fleet at a time, until nothing remains but the memory of what you once were." Admiral Zexthara stared at the impossible human ship and realized that she was witnessing the beginning of the end of everything she had spent her life defending. The species that the hegemony had tried to eliminate had returned, and they had brought with them technologies that made 3,000 years of galactic dominance suddenly seem very fragile indeed. The war for galactic supremacy was about to begin, and for the first time in millennia, the hegemony was not guaranteed to win. The boarding action began without warning. One moment, Admiral Zexthara was staring at the impossible human ship on her view screen, and the next moment her bridge was filled with intruders who had somehow materialized directly through the Eternal Dominion's hull. The humans wore form-fitting armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and their weapons hummed with energy signatures that registered as pure impossibility on every sensor. "Stand down," Captain Chen said calmly as she stepped through what appeared to be solid bulkhead. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had never doubted that her orders would be obeyed. "Admiral, I need you and your crew to remain exactly where you are while my people conduct a small demonstration." Zexthara reached for the emergency alert but found that her hand would not obey her commands. A faint shimmer surrounded her body, and she realized that the humans had somehow immobilized her without causing any pain or damage. It was the kind of precise technological control that should have been impossible for any species to achieve. Yet here she was, frozen in place by weapons that worked on principles she did not understand. "How?" she managed to ask through vocal cords that barely responded to her will. "Neural interface manipulation," one of the human soldiers explained helpfully. He was a tall man with augmented eyes that glowed with soft blue light. "We're temporarily interrupting the signals between your brain and motor functions. Perfectly safe and completely reversible. We learned the technique from studying captured hegemony bioenhancement technology." Captain Chen moved to the command station and placed her hand on the living metal surface of the ship's primary control interface. The biomechanical systems responded to her touch instantly, as if she were a legitimate hegemony officer rather than a member of a supposedly extinct species. Information flowed across the organic displays at a rate that suggested the human captain was downloading the entire contents of the ship's memory banks. "Fascinating," Chen murmured as she absorbed data that had taken the hegemony centuries to accumulate. "You've made some interesting improvements since the last time we captured one of your vessels. The integration between biological and mechanical systems has become remarkably sophisticated. Our xenobiologist will be very pleased with this information." "That's impossible," Commander Velthaz managed to say despite the neural dampening field. "Biomechanical interfaces are genetically locked. Only enhanced hegemony personnel can access them." Captain Chen glanced at him with something that might have been amusement. "Commander, you're still thinking in terms of the limitations that your species accepts as natural law. We stopped accepting those limitations about 1,500 years ago, shortly after we realized that the only way to survive was to become something more than what we'd been." She gestured, and several of her soldiers moved to other stations around the bridge. Each one placed their hands on the biomechanical interfaces, and each one gained immediate access to systems that should have been impossible for non-hegemony species to use. Within minutes, they had complete control of the massive dreadnought. "The truth is, Admiral," Chen continued as she worked, "we've been inside your technology for a very long time. Those molecular disassembly devices we used on your fleet, they weren't weapons. They were data-gathering tools. Every time we've encountered a hegemony vessel over the past 1,000 years, we've been quietly sampling your biomechanical systems and learning how they function." Admiral Zexthara watched in horror as the humans systematically accessed every classified system on her ship: tactical databases, strategic plans, technological specifications. Everything was being copied and analyzed with an efficiency that suggested they had done this many times before. "Been infiltrating our ships for 1,000 years?" she asked. "Longer than that," Chen replied. "The first human infiltration teams reached hegemony space about 1,800 years ago. They were volunteers, Admiral, men and women who willingly allowed themselves to be captured so that they could study your technology from the inside. Most of them died in your interrogation facilities, but they transmitted enough information back to us to begin developing countermeasures. The captain's expression hardened as she accessed files that contained detailed records of hegemony interrogation techniques. Did you know that your scientists kept some of them alive for decades, Admiral? They were curious about human pain tolerance and psychological resilience. Very thorough researchers, your people. They documented everything. Zex Thahara felt something she had not experienced since her enhancement procedures. Shame. The files that Captain Chen was reviewing contained records of experiments that had been conducted in the name of understanding conquered species. At the time, they had seemed like reasonable scientific inquiry. Now, viewed through the eyes of the victims' descendants, they appeared monstrous. The volunteers knew what would happen to them, Chen continued. They knew they would never see home again, never see their families again. But they went anyway, because they understood that knowledge was the only weapon that could possibly defeat you. They died so that we could learn how to kill you. The human captain moved to the tactical station and began reviewing the hegemony's current fleet dispositions. Star charts appeared on the displays, showing the positions of every major military installation within 50 light years. As she studied the information, her soldiers completed their own data gathering and began to withdraw toward what Zex Thara assumed were their ships. Wait, the Admiral said, finding that she could speak again as the neural dampening field weakened. If you've been planning this for 2,000 years, why reveal yourselves now? You could have continued your infiltration indefinitely. Captain Chen paused in her data collection and looked directly at Zex Thara. For a moment, the coldly professional mask slipped, and the Admiral saw something in the human's eyes that made her blood run cold. Compassion. Because we're not like you, Admiral. Chen said quietly, we're not interested in ruling the galaxy or enslaving other species. We want the killing to stop. All of it. The constant expansion, the systematic destruction of civilizations, the reduction of sentient beings to resources to be exploited. We want it to end. Impossible, Zex Thara said automatically. The galaxy requires order. Without hegemony oversight, there would be chaos. Species would war against each other, resources would be wasted, technological development would stagnate. We provide stability. You provide slavery, Chen corrected. You've created a galaxy where every species lives in fear of being the next one to be conquered, where technological advancement is impossible because you control all research, where entire civilizations exist only to serve your needs. The human captain activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Thousands of star systems were color-coded according to their status within the hegemony citizens. Manufacturing systems populated by enslaved species, agricultural worlds where conquered populations grew food for their masters, and mining colonies where the most dangerous work was performed by species deemed expendable. Look at it, Admiral, Chen said. Really look at it. This isn't an empire. It's a vast machine designed to extract value from every living being in the galaxy. You've turned an entire spiral arm into a labor camp. Zex Thara stared at the display and realized that she had never seen it presented this way before. From a hegemony perspective, the galaxy was a model of efficiency and order. From any other perspective, it was a nightmare of systematic oppression that had continued for 3,000 years. What's your alternative? She asked. Teddy. Remove hegemony control and watch everything collapse into anarchy? Freedom, Chen said simply. The right of every species to determine its own destiny. The opportunity for civilizations to grow and develop without interference. The chance for the galaxy to become something other than a prison. And if species choose to war against each other, if they destroy themselves without hegemony guidance. Captain Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying the star charts with an expression that suggested she had considered this question many times. Then that's their choice to make, she said finally. Freedom includes the freedom to fail, Admiral. It includes the freedom to make mistakes. What it doesn't include is the right to impose your will on others because you think you know better. The Admiral found herself considering ideas that had been literally unthinkable during her enhancement process. The biomechanical modifications that had turned her into a perfect hegemony officer had included psychological conditioning that made questioning the Empire's fundamental assumptions nearly impossible. Yet somehow the human captain's words were penetrating barriers that had been built into her mind at the cellular level. "How many of us do you intend to kill?" she asked. "As few as possible," Chen replied, and Zexthara was surprised to realize that the human was telling the truth. "Admiral, we've spent 2,000 years studying your species. We understand your biology, your psychology, your culture. We know that most hegemony citizens genuinely believe that they're bringing order and prosperity to the galaxy. You're not evil, you're just wrong. And what happens to us when your revolution succeeds?" Captain Chen completed her data downloads and gestured for her soldiers to prepare for departure. "That depends on you, Admiral. Some of your people will undoubtedly choose to fight to the end rather than accept change. Those will stop permanently if necessary. But others might be willing to learn that there are better ways to live than as conquerors." The humans began to phase out through the ship's hull, using the same impossible technology that had brought them aboard. As Captain Chen prepared to leave, she paused and looked back at the Admiral. "Zexthara, you're considered one of the most brilliant military minds in hegemony history. You've never lost a battle, never failed to achieve your objectives. But you've also never faced an opponent that refused to accept defeat. Think about that while you're reporting this encounter to your superiors." "What should I tell them?" Zexthara asked. Captain Chen's smile was not unkind, but it carried the weight of 2 millennia of careful planning. "Tell them the truth, Admiral. Tell them that humanity has returned, and we're not interested in negotiating. Tell them that their empire is built on foundations we've been undermining for 2,000 years. Tell them that the galaxy is about to change, whether they wanted to or not." The human captain disappeared through the hull, leaving Admiral Zexthara alone with her crew and the terrible knowledge that everything she had believed about the galaxy was about to be proven wrong. The neural dampening fields faded, and she found herself able to move again, but she remained motionless as she contemplated the implications of what had just happened. Inexperience. For 3,000 years, the hegemony had maintained control through superior technology and military force. But the humans had just demonstrated that they possessed both in abundance, along with something that the hegemony had forgotten how to counter: the absolute determination to be free, no matter what the cost. The war for galactic supremacy had begun, and Admiral Zexthara had the sinking feeling that her side had been losing it for centuries without realizing it. The emergency session of the Hegemony High Command convened within hours of Admiral Zexthara's report reaching the core worlds. The vast amphitheater on Hegemon Prime had not seen such urgency since the synthetic uprising 800 years ago, and the assembled leaders represented every major faction within the Galactic Empire. Supreme Commander Maltek presided from the central dais, his enhanced form towering over the gathering like a living monument to hegemony power. "Admiral Zexthara," the Supreme Commander's voice resonated through bioacoustic amplifiers built into the walls themselves. "Your report claims that a single primitive vessel disabled your entire fleet and infiltrated your flagship. Explain to this assembly how such an impossibility occurred." Zexthara stood at the center of the amphitheater, surrounded by the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Each one had been enhanced beyond the limits of their original biology, transformed into perfect instruments of imperial will. Yet as she looked at their faces, she saw something she had never noticed before: fear. Her report had shaken the foundations of everything they believed about their own invincibility. "Supreme Commander, the vessel was not primitive," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Our initial scans were incomplete. The humans have developed technologies that operate on principles we do not understand. Their capabilities exceed our own in several critical areas." A ripple of discussion swept through the assembly. War Master Zeftok of the 3rd Expansion Fleet leaned forward, his multiple arms gesturing dismissively. "Impossible! No species has ever developed technology superior to our own. The humans were a young race with barely 3,000 years of recorded history when we eliminated them. They were not eliminated, Zexthara replied firmly. They were scattered. And they have spent the intervening centuries preparing for this moment. Supreme Commander, they possess weapons that can bypass our shields, neutralize our biomechanical systems, and infiltrate our ships at will. They know our technology better than we know theirs. Supreme Commander Maltek's enhanced mind processed information at superhuman speeds, correlating Zexthara's report with thousands of seemingly unrelated incidents from across the galaxy. For the first time, patterns began to emerge that painted a disturbing picture of systematic infiltration and preparation. Intelligence Commander Yathera, Maltek said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Present your analysis of unusual incidents over the past 500 years. Focus on unexplained equipment failures, mysterious technological malfunctions, and encounters with unidentified vessels. The intelligence commander rose, her form shifting as internal displays activated throughout her enhanced body. Data flowed across her skin in living patterns of light, showing maps, statistics, and tactical analyses. What she revealed made the assembly fall into stunned silence. Over the past 5 centuries, we have recorded 14,847 incidents of equipment failure that defied technical explanation, Yathera reported. An additional 3,256 encounters with unidentified vessels that disappeared before they could be properly investigated. Most significantly, we have detected traces of unknown technology at 892 different locations across 17 sectors. The holographic displays throughout the amphitheater lit up with star charts showing the distribution of these incidents. The pattern was unmistakable. A careful, systematic survey of hegemony space that had been conducted over hundreds of years without anyone noticing the connections. The incidents appeared random when viewed individually, Yathara continued. But when analyzed as a whole, they reveal a coordinated intelligence operation of unprecedented scope and duration. Someone has been studying our military installations, our trade routes, our technological capabilities, and our defensive weaknesses for centuries. War Master Kolthara of the 7th Sector Defense Force stood, her biomechanical enhancements crackling with barely contained energy. Are you suggesting that the humans have been conducting espionage operations across the entire galaxy for 500 years without detection? Longer than that, Admiral Zexthara interjected. Captain Shen claimed that their infiltration began 1,800 years ago. If the intelligence analysis is accurate, they've been gathering information about us for longer than some of our member species have been spacefaring. The implications hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Every officer present had spent their careers believing in the absolute security of hegemony space. The idea that an enemy had been moving freely among them for centuries was almost too terrible to contemplate. Supreme Commander Maltek activated his personal communications array and established connections with fleet commanders across the galaxy. Within moments, reports began flowing in from every sector of hegemony space. What they revealed was worse than anyone had imagined. The Zirian system incident was not unique. Similar attacks were occurring simultaneously across dozens of star systems. Human ships had appeared without warning at military installations, trade centers, and colonial administrations throughout the Empire. Each attack followed the same pattern: minimal casualties, sophisticated technology, and careful extraction of intelligence data. Supreme Commander, came a transmission from the Antares sector. Admiral Velkaren reporting. We are under attack by unknown vessels using impossible technology. Our shields are useless, our weapons ineffective. They're boarding our ships and downloading our databanks. Similar reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The humans had not sent a single ship to challenge the hegemony. They had launched a coordinated offensive involving hundreds of vessels striking at carefully selected targets. Each one was designed to gather intelligence, capture technology, and demonstrate the futility of hegemony defenses. How many ships? Maltek demanded. Intelligence Commander, how many vessels are the humans deploying? Euthara's enhanced mind processed incoming data streams from across the Empire. Her expression grew more troubled with each passing moment. Supreme Commander, current estimates suggest a minimum of 300 human vessels conducting simultaneous operations. However, the energy signatures indicate that many of these may be the quantum duplicates that Admiral Zexthera reported. The actual number of ships could be as low as 100 or as high as 1,000. That's impossible, War Master Zeftok insisted. No species could build and maintain a fleet of that size in secret. The resource requirements alone would be astronomical. Unless they're not building them in secret, Zexthara said quietly. The realization was forming in her mind as she spoke, and it was more terrifying than anything she had yet considered. Commander Euthara, analyze the composition of the reported human vessels. Are they all of similar design? The intelligence commander's displays shifted to show detailed scans of the attacking ships. What they revealed confirmed Zexthara's worst fears. While some of the vessels showed consistent human design characteristics, others were clearly based on captured hegemony technology. Still others appeared to incorporate design elements from dozens of different species. They're not just using their own ships, Zexthera explained to the stunned assembly. They're using ours. Every vessel they've captured over the centuries, every piece of technology they've stolen, every resource they've acquired through infiltration. They've been building a fleet using the hegemony's own assets. Supreme Commander Maltek processed this information with the cold efficiency that had made him the most feared military leader in galactic history. But for the first time in his enhanced existence, he found himself facing a problem that could not be solved through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. Estimated fleet strength? He asked. Unknown, Euthara admitted. If they have been capturing and converting our vessels for 1,800 years, combined with their own construction capabilities, they could potentially field a force equal to or exceeding our own. The amphitheater fell silent as the full scope of the crisis became clear. The hegemony had spent 3,000 years building the most powerful military force in galactic history, only to discover that their enemies had been quietly building an equivalent force using the hegemony's own resources. Options? Maltek demanded. War Master Koltara was the first to respond. Immediate mobilization of all reserve fleets. Concentrate our forces at strategic choke points and force them into conventional battles where our numerical superiority can be brought to bear. Ineffective, Admiral Zexthara countered. Their technology allows them to bypass conventional defensive strategies. They can appear anywhere at any time using methods we don't understand. Concentration of forces simply provides them with larger targets. Then what do you suggest? Malthek asked. Zexthera looked around the amphitheater at the assembled leaders of the Galactic Empire. These were beings who had conquered civilizations, reshaped entire sectors of space, and ruled over trillions of sentient creatures. But they were all thinking in terms of the kind of warfare they understood: massive fleets meeting in open battle, superior technology overwhelming inferior opponents, the systematic application of overwhelming force. Adaptation, she said finally. We need to understand their technology, develop countermeasures, and modify our tactics to account for their capabilities. This is not going to be won through conventional military action. Time frame? Maltek asked. Unknown. They've had 2,000 years to prepare for this moment. We're starting from complete ignorance of their capabilities. The Supreme Commander was quiet for a long moment, his enhanced mind calculating probabilities and strategic options. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute authority and terrible determination. War Master Kolthera, implement Emergency Protocol 7 across all sectors. Every available vessel is to be recalled to core system defense. Intelligence Commander Euthara, I want every piece of data we have on human technology analyzed and disseminated to our research facilities. Admiral Zexthara, you will command a special task force dedicated to developing countermeasures against human capabilities. He paused, and when he continued, there was something in his voice that none of the assembled officers had ever heard before. uncertainty. The hegemony has maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years. We will not allow a handful of escaped primitives to destroy everything we have built. But make no mistake, this is no longer a police action or a minor rebellion. This is total war against an enemy that knows us better than we know ourselves. The assembly began to disperse as commanders rushed to implement their orders, but as Admiral Zexthara prepared to leave, she found herself wondering if it was already too late. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that seemed to violate fundamental laws of physics, and they had been planning this campaign for longer than most civilizations had existed. For the first time in 3 millennia, the hegemony was facing an enemy that might actually be capable of defeating them. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object, and Admiral Zexthara suspected that the collision would shatter both. 6 months after the first human attacks, the hegemony controlled less than half the territory it had ruled for 3,000 years. Admiral Zexthara stood in the tactical center of the Deep Space Defense Platform Omega-7. Watching holographic displays that showed the systematic collapse of galactic civilization. Red indicators marked systems that had fallen to human forces. Yellow showed sectors where fighting continued, and the shrinking patches of blue represented worlds still under hegemony control. The speed of the collapse had been breathtaking. Human forces had not conquered territories in the traditional sense. They had liberated them. On world after world, the appearance of human ships had triggered massive uprisings among enslaved populations. Species that had been crushed under hegemony rule for centuries suddenly found themselves with weapons, support, and most importantly, hope. "Admiral," reported Commander Velpethes, who had been assigned to her special task force after the Zarian incident, "we're receiving surrender requests from the Antares Defense Fleet. Admiral Velkaran reports that human forces have convinced 3/4 of her enslaved crews to mutiny. The remaining ships are requesting permission to withdraw to core systems." Zexthara nodded grimly. It was a pattern that had been repeated across the galaxy. The hegemony's military strength had always depended on the labor of conquered species, but the humans had somehow learned to turn that dependency into a weakness. Their ships carried devices that could temporarily disable the biomechanical control implants that kept enslaved crews obedient. Free for the first time in centuries, those crews rarely chose to continue serving their masters. "Grant the withdrawal request," she ordered. "There's no point in forcing a battle we can't win." The truth was painful to admit, but it had become undeniable. Despite their technological superiority and vast military resources, the hegemony was losing the war. Not because their enemies were stronger, but because their enemies were offering something that no hegemony world could match: freedom. "Admiral, incoming transmission from Supreme Commander Maltek," the communications officer reported. "Priority Alpha." The holographic display shifted to show the Supreme Commander's enhanced form. Even across the vast distance separating them, Zexthara could see the strain that 6 months of continuous crisis had placed on the leader of galactic civilization. His biomechanical enhancements were working at maximum efficiency, but there were limits to what even enhanced beings could endure.
"Admiral Zexthara," Malthek began without preamble.
"Report on the effectiveness of your countermeasures program." "Limited success, Supreme Commander," she replied honestly. "We have developed partial defenses against some human technologies, but they continue to evolve faster than we can adapt. Every time we counter one of their capabilities, they deploy something new that we've never seen before." "Explain." Zexthara activated her own tactical displays, showing the results of 6 months of desperate research and development. "We've created shield modifications that can resist their phase penetration weapons approximately 60% of the time. Our biomechanical systems can now detect and resist their molecular disassembly devices for limited periods. We've even developed countermeasures against their neural interface manipulation." "But," Maltek prompted, sensing the qualification in her tone, "but they've adapted to each countermeasure within weeks of its deployment." "Supreme Commander, they're not just using advanced technology. They're using technology that can modify itself in real time. Their ships learn from every encounter, evolve to counter our defenses, and share that information across their entire fleet instantaneously. The implications hung in the air between them. The hegemony's entire approach to warfare was based on the assumption that they would always possess superior technology. But the humans had created technology that could evolve faster than any conventional research and development program could match. Additional concerns? Maltek asked. Intelligence reports suggest that human forces are not acting alone, Zexthera said carefully. At least 17 species have joined their rebellion. The Kethrani have provided them with mining technology and rare minerals. The Marathians are sharing their expertise in biomechanical engineering. The Silicon Lords have contributed advanced computational systems. Impossible. Those species are extinct. No, Supreme Commander, they are enslaved. Or rather, they were enslaved. The humans have been quietly evacuating the most capable individuals from each conquered species for centuries. They've been building not just a fleet, but an alliance of everyone we've ever wronged. The tactical display shifted to show intelligence estimates of the human coalition. It was staggering in scope, dozens of species working together, pooling their knowledge and resources to create a force that was technologically diverse, highly motivated, and absolutely committed to the destruction of hegemony rule. Estimated coalition strength? Maltek asked. Unknown, but substantial. They're not trying to match our numbers, Supreme Commander. They're trying to make numbers irrelevant. Every human ship carries representatives from multiple species. Every weapon system incorporates the best technology that dozens of civilizations can provide. They've created a military force that's more than the sum of its parts. Supreme Commander Maltek was silent for several long moments, processing information that challenged every assumption upon which hegemony's strategy was based. When he finally spoke, his words carried a weight of decision that Zexthara recognized with growing dread. Admiral, you will implement Protocol Omega across all remaining hegemony territories. If we cannot maintain control through conventional means, we will ensure that our enemies inherit nothing but ashes. Supreme Commander, Zexthara said carefully, Protocol Omega calls for the systematic destruction of all infrastructure, resources, and populations in territories that cannot be held. That would mean the deaths of trillions of sentient beings. Better that than allowing them to serve our enemies, Maltek replied coldly. The hegemony has maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years. If that peace cannot be preserved, then we will ensure that the chaos that follows serves as a lesson to future generations about the cost of rebellion. Admiral Zexthara stared at the Supreme Commander's image and realized that she was witnessing the final transformation of the hegemony from a force for order into something monstrous. The empire that claimed to bring civilization to the galaxy was preparing to destroy that same galaxy rather than lose control of it. I cannot implement that order, Supreme Commander, she said quietly. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Protocol refusal was not just insubordination. It was a concept that did not exist within hegemony military doctrine. Enhanced officers were psychologically incapable of disobeying direct orders from their superiors. Yet somehow, Zexthara found herself able to speak the words that should have been impossible. Explain your refusal, Maltek said, his voice carrying undertones of genuine confusion. Because Captain Chen was right, Zexthara replied. The hegemony has become everything it claimed to oppose. We are not bringing order to the galaxy. We are imposing slavery. We are not protecting civilization. We are preventing it from developing. We are not maintaining peace. We are enforcing oppression. She gestured to the tactical displays showing the collapse of hegemony control. Look at what's happening, Supreme Commander. On every world the humans have liberated, former slaves are working together to rebuild their societies. They're sharing technology, cooperating across species lines, creating something new and better than what we destroyed. Chaos, Maltek said dismissively. Without central control, they will inevitably turn on each other. war and suffering will follow. Perhaps, Zexthara agreed, but that will be their choice to make, their chance to succeed or fail based on their own decisions rather than our control. The Supreme Commander's image flickered with interference that suggested extreme emotional stress. Admiral, your enhancement protocols should make such reasoning impossible. Report to the nearest hegemony facility for immediate psychological evaluation and reconditioning. I will not be reporting for reconditioning, Zexthara said firmly, and I will not be implementing Protocol Omega. If you want those orders carried out, you'll need to find someone else to do it. With that, she severed the communication link and turned to face her staff. Every officer in the tactical center was staring at her with expressions of shock and confusion. What they had just witnessed was literally unthinkable according to their understanding of how enhanced hegemony personnel functioned. Commander Velthus, she said calmly, open a channel to the human forces in this sector. I believe it's time to arrange a surrender. Admiral, Velthus said hesitantly, I'm not sure I understand what you're doing. I'm choosing a side, Zexthara replied. For 3 centuries, I believed that the hegemony represented order and civilization. But order without choice is not civilization. It's slavery. The humans are offering something better, the chance for every species to determine its own destiny. But the chaos, another officer began, will be temporary, Zexthara interrupted. Chaos is the natural state that precedes the emergence of new order. The question is whether that new order will be imposed from above or chosen from below. The communication systems activated, and within minutes Admiral Zexthara found herself in contact with Captain Chen aboard the Indomitable. The human officer's expression showed surprise but not suspicion when she received the surrender offer. Admiral, Chen said carefully, I want to be certain I understand what you're proposing. You're offering to surrender your entire command structure? More than that, Zexthara replied. I'm offering intelligence on remaining hegemony defenses, strategic plans, and the location of core military installations. I'm also offering to assist in the liberation of enslaved populations throughout this sector. In exchange for? Nothing, Zexthara said simply. I'm not bargaining, Captain. I'm choosing to do what's right. Captain Chen studied her for a long moment, and Zexthara realized that the human was trying to determine whether this was some kind of elaborate trap. Finally, Chen nodded slowly. Admiral, you should understand that there's no going back from this decision. Once you've chosen to help us, the hegemony will consider you a traitor. They'll hunt you for the rest of your life. I understand, Zexthara replied. Captain, may I ask you something? Of course. What happens when you've won? When the hegemony has been completely defeated and every enslaved species has been liberated, what comes next? Captain Chen's expression softened slightly. We don't know, Admiral. We've spent 2,000 years planning for the war, but we've deliberately avoided planning for the peace. That's something that all the liberated species will need to decide together. And if they choose to fight among themselves, if some species try to dominate others, then we'll deal with that when it happens, Chen said firmly. But we'll deal with it as free beings making free choices, not as slaves following orders. The galaxy may not be perfect after this war ends, but it will be free to become whatever it chooses to become. Admiral Zexthara looked around the tactical center one last time at the displays showing the collapse of the only civilization she had ever known. Then she turned back to Captain Chen and smiled. That's all anyone can ask for, she said. Freedom to choose their own destiny, even if they choose wrongly. Especially if they choose wrongly, Chen corrected. The right to make mistakes is the most important right of all. As the first human ships began arriving to accept the surrender of Deep Space Defense Platform Omega-7, Admiral Zexthara realized that she was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization based on the principle that no one had the right to rule over others without their consent. It would be chaotic, uncertain, and frequently frustrating, but it would be free. And for the first time in her enhanced life, that seemed more important than order. The hegemony's 3,000-year reign was ending, but what was beginning might actually be worth the price that had been paid to achieve it. The galaxy was about to discover what it meant to be truly free, and Admiral Zek-Stara intended to help ensure that they made the most of the opportunity. The war was ending, but the real challenge was just beginning. Learning how to live without masters. Galactic Supremacy shattered when a human warship entered the system, HFY Sci-Fi.